Before I do the start doing the recap, Usha, any questions from yesterday's session? You are not audible, just in case if you're speaking. Let me compare with Oracle.
She spoke to me a couple of minutes ago, so I think maybe she's on mute. Okay.
Yeah, I am on mute actually. Sorry.
Okay. Let me do a quick recap, Usha. Hopefully the remaining two folks join by the time. Let me compare how the recovery happens in Oracle. Okay. Not recovery. How is the transaction log stuff in Oracle? So help me here, Chandra, if you still remember those Oracle days. You have a disk here or data file. Data is read into memory, right?
Right.
The basic unit of I/O here is block. The default is 8K. Right. In memory, you have something called buffer caches or buffers. The database cache or whatever that is, database buffers.
Yeah, SGA, PGA.
Right. Or SGA. So this is read here, and there is something called undo tablespace.
Right.
Prior image is kept. Let's say you have a salary table. Employee ID, employee name, employee salary, 501. Let's say Chandra. Your salary, let's say, is $10,000. And my objective is to run an update statement like this. Okay. So this is part of a specific block. This record will be part of, let's say, a specific block. So let's say this is part of block, let's say 51. The specific block is read here. The same block prior image is kept here. And the update happens here. And you have a modified block version. So the moment something is modified in memory, immediately the same thing is the changed stuff is written in what is it, redo buffer. The moment you hear something called buffer, it's always memory, right? From redo buffer, right. It is written in redo logs. So I'm not talking on when you move from redo buffer to redo logs, there are certain conditions. It can happen immediately or maybe 2 seconds or 1/3 is full or some kind of scenarios are there, right? So the point I want to talk more is how many redo log files we have. Let's say we have a redo groups, then redo groups have redo logs within it, whatever that is. Let's say you have a 3 redo groups. Group 1, group 2, group 3. These are always circular, right? These are always
right.
Circular. Whether you enable archive logging or not, these are always circular. When I say circular, it starts from group 1, then go to group 2, then go to group 3, then again it comes back to group 1.
Yeah.
By the time it come to group 1, you should have copied group 1 in archive log location.
Right.
Right? So that means even if I have a long transaction starting here in group 1, it is going to group 2, it is going to group 3, you will still come back and override group 1 because the policy in Oracle is even there is a open transaction in any group, you still copy that into an archive log location.
Right.
Now, who does that? It's by this archiver process from the backend. It takes care of it by default. Right? Whenever a log file is full, it just pushes that to archive log location. Archiver process.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Right? So I'm not going in detail again, like the importance of archiving and importance of redo stuff. You can go back
No,
to the
not like
recording.
yeah.
Right? So this is the whole process. Just in case if a crash happens, you have archive log files, you have redo log groups from where you can come to the point in time recovery. Okay. Now, how is it happening in DB2? It's the same stuff, right? You again have a disk or data file here, right? We still the same concept like in any other database memory, right? But here the basic IO we call it as a page. The default page size is 4K. Assume that it is stored somewhere on page 51. So first fundamental difference is DB2 does not have something called undo table space, right? Oracle has undo table space to store the prior image, but DB2 does not have anything like that. So if it does not have anything like that, where it stores the prior images, it still uses the redo logs to store the prior images, right? Redo logs have the same prior image before and after copy. That means whenever a change happens, let's say you run an update statement. Whenever you run an update statement, so it goes to the, here we call just a terminology difference, log buffer. From log buffer, you go to the transactional logs. You just call it as a transactional and Oracle calls it as a redo. Now here comes a major difference. Oracle has 3 redo log groups, right? But assume here also you have a 3 uh, transactional logs, right, by default. But at a high level, what you have is you have a 2 kinds of transactional logs. 2 types of transactional log management. One is
One for undo and one for redo.
no. One is when no archiving, no archive mode, for example, no archive mode, and when you have archive mode. When you haven't enabled archive mode, which is a default for any database, when I install Oracle, it's not enabled. Archive is not enabled by default. So DB2 also the same thing. So let's say the transaction logs, I named it as, we name this as a S01 or something like that, S1, S2 and S3, right? After S1, it goes to S2, it goes to S3, then it will come back to S1.
Yeah.
It's same behavior like Oracle. It's a circular. And I don't have to store these filled up archive logs, filled up redo logs or transaction logs in archive log location because it's a no archive mode. But what happens here in archive mode if I enable is, you start with S1, S2, and these three logs are allocated for us. After you fill up S3, it won't be circular again. You will get S4 allocated, S5 allocated, S6 allocated. It's a forward moving. I mean, forward itself is. Okay.
Is there any endpoint like that?
No, there is no endpoint.
Okay.
Now, why DB2 follows this philosophy is only one point you have to remember. In Oracle, even though there is an open transaction in any redo log group or redo log files, when I say open transaction, a transaction that is not yet committed. For example, you start a long transaction here of an update statement. Update of 1 million records. So the same update redo is written in group 2, the same update redo is written in group 3, right? But Oracle allows me to come back to group 1 and override this group 1 here, right?
Yeah.
So, but what DB2 does is DB2 won't allow to do that. Right after S1, S2 and S3, it will allocate S4, it will allocate S5 and then it will go to S6, right? You will only move files from this transactional log directory to archive log directory. Only there is something called log eligible for archiving. When a log is eligible for archiving, when full, I mean when no open transaction. When there is no open transaction, then only it's eligible. So even though S3, these three are full, you allocate S4, then S1 will move here. At any point, it tries to put only 3 log files, right? If S2 is this movement also happens automatically. Just only remember this. It's only forward direction.
Ravi, a
But
question
what you
here.
are saying is you want to keep DB2 wants to keep only last 3 transaction logs on the system.
Right. 3 is the default number, but what we have in my environment is 256.
Okay.
Right.
So it depends upon memory, maybe.
Yeah, your disk requirements and OLTP. It should be pretty much the big number like that only, right? 3 is a very small, right? We give somewhere around 200, 220. Very good environments have like that, right?
Okay.
Because 3 gets filled up.
Yeah. I override her question she's trying to ask.
Yeah, go ahead, Usha.
So say just for the keeping it simple, we say we have only 5 log files, okay, primary log files, and say we are trying to do some million records at one go with this 5. So does that mean that all the first first one, second, and third are filled with open transactions, and they don't move to the archive log file?
Yes.
And then it becomes log.
Yes, they won't move. So that's a little confusing stuff for Chandra. Now what we are talking about here is there is a parameter here called the log primary. So if I say this log primary as 5, like Usha mentioned, that means at any point I can have only 5 transactional logs. Let me start with S1. S2, S3, S4, S5. There is nothing in the archive. So I started an update statement here. Update of million records. Right? Now the update starts writing into S1, log 1, then it goes to log 2. So see, still this is active log. This also becomes active. This also becomes active. This also becomes active. This also becomes active. So once S5 is full, it won't allocate S6 because I can only have 5 log files. And it cannot come back and overwrite S1 because there is still an active transaction. Now here is an important thing. Why DB2 does like this is, in Oracle you have something called undo tablespace. So you have a confidence that even you overwrite something like this, and even though you push it to archive, if you want to undo a transaction, you see what I'm trying to say? You will get that undo information from undo tablespace, right? But here, since there is no undo, redo only has both redo plus undo. You don't want to throw this away for active transaction, right? It's one way good. You don't have a headache of maintaining undo tablespace, but somewhere you have to compromise, right? In a log, you have both undo here. So if I move this open transaction to archive log, if let's say someone is rolling back this active transaction, you're gone. You can't get the information from logs. So that's why it says that I don't allow you to move any active transactions log files from this location to archive log location, right? So here we have to follow these rules. 5 is fixed. Let's say assume that 5 is what you're starting. You won't get the S6 allocated
unless something goes wrong.
Unless something moves from here to archive log location, but it cannot move because all are active. When is log eligible for archive? When no open or active transactions. Now that's where you have a concept called log second. This is like I gave this example yesterday. We run on our salary income. Let's say if we run out of our salary money this month for whatever the reason, and if let's say I have like a week more, to get my salary here in India, I have to survive, right? Next 3 days, 4 days. So I always keep some catastrophic, DR money, right? In worst case, we'll pull that from there. So that's exactly the same thing, log second. If primary is stuck, this log second is another configuration parameter. Let's say if I say this as a 3, it will try to allocate three log files.
Okay.
And you cannot get more than 3. If the transaction is still active, you have no option other than rolling back. If the transaction is still active even after this, you get a message that transactional log is full. Right?
Yeah.
Now there are some options here. When I put log second as -1, which is not the default one, if I just update it to -1, you get unlimited number of secondary log files assigned. Unlimited. There is no limit how many log files you get.
Okay, that is log second minus 1. Okay.
No, if I give log second value as -1 means infinite logging.
But that can fill the disk up, right?
Yes, that's your headache, right?
In case.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. So that's the risk actually we have to evaluate. If it is really a crazy transaction, should we terminate or should we let the disk fill up? Is something the call. Generally, we don't give -1. So some best parameters we give is log primary is 256. Log primary size is somewhere around 300 to 500 MB. Something we give like that. It's a huge log space. Just to be on a safer side, log second is uh, log primary plus log secondary should not be more than 256. There is a little rule, 5 or 6. Yeah, this is all.
Is it a strict rule?
Yes, unless log secondary is -1. So here is a little rule. If log second is not equal -1, then log primary plus log second less than or equal to 256. Else log primary only less than or equal to 256. This is a little algorithm. When log second is not equal to -1, that means finite logging. This is infinite logging scenario. So that's primary. See, you will only go to the secondary when there is this kind of a situation, right? So coming back to your question, Usha. Um, so after 5 are full, yeah, you will go back to the secondary. That how long you depend upon secondary depends upon your parameter here.
Mm-hmm. So yesterday, I think, right, we ran into transaction log fill
Right.
error we got. So that means both the primary and the secondary were full.
Yes, you ran out of money in both scenarios. Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So is there a way for us to see which one is which? Is there any transaction which is filling up and where we can, instead of adding spaces, supposing I'm short of to add any more space for the log primaries, if I reach that point, is there a way something we can find which transaction is filling up and try to kill that or
Yes,
something of that
there
kind?
is a standard monitoring script we have that I'll share the details. Yeah,
Okay.
but sometimes these are very fast to catch up. So that's why, like I was discussing yesterday, there are two parameters called number of log files and max size, right? So if I give number of log files as, let's say, 100, max size as max size is in percentage as 40%. If any transaction, if any transaction log information is part of 100 log files, then terminate it. For example, in this scenario, if I give number of log files as 4, the transaction started
That means
here. Yeah, it will terminate somewhere after it reaches S4.
okay.
Because we are risking. So this number
Right.
something you have to carefully give. And maximum size, if let's say each one is 1 MB, if I have a 5 MB of a log file size, I say 40% is if a transaction reaches 2 MB. If transaction uses 2 MB of log space, it will terminate. System will terminate.
So this is a part of the DB2 code.
This is part of DB2 code. Yes, these numbers you have to give by default.
The
They are
code.
00. Let me show you once.
Ravi, while you're doing, just one quick question. This is Vasu. So, okay, it's full and it's rolling back. What happens in the rollback? Does the logs will be removed? The space will be released? Or how does it handle in that scenario? Do we need to clean manually, or it does the cleaning on its own?
Okay, I'll come back to that, sir. This is the parameters I'm talking about. Number of log spans is 0, and max logs, yeah, max underscore log. These are the two parameters.
Okay, this is at the database setting.
Yeah, this is at the database setting. But by default, these are not enabled. But I bet majority of a DBS, who are starting DB2 might not have idea on this. But this helps us to control the environment which is unstable, very unstable.
Okay. Okay, this option we have. Good to know.
Number of log spans and okay. Now coming to Vasusa's question on what happens when I roll back, right? So let's assume that the transaction rolled back here because I have only 5 log files for whatever the reason. But for this parameter, since I cannot have more than 4 logs spanning, it started rolling back. Now, like I said, my transaction log is a guy which holds both undo and redo, prior images and right. So at any point, transaction log is nothing but a reverse SQL statement, so that I can go back to the previous state. For example, here you are updating. If my update statement is update salary, set employee salary to 12,000, where employee ID equal to 501. So transaction logs, what it does is it just stores the reverse image, right? So it stores, it just stores two kinds of statements in the transaction logs here. So it just like salary, set employee salary equal to 10,000, where employee ID equal to 501. This is for undo. If I want to go back, the exact same information for the redo. 50. This is redo. So it just does. This is what happens during the rollback. It just makes sure that it applies all the undo prior images, right? And once it completes doing all these prior images replacement, right, bringing back, coming back to the starting of the transaction. Let's say you updated 1,000 rows from 1,000, 999, 998. When it comes back to the starting of the transaction, right? Again, again, that information of rolling back has to be written even in the logs, right? The information of rolling back also has to be written on the logs. As far as I know, it won't write entire. The rolling back might not need all the 4 logs. For doing the operation, you might need 4 logs, but to roll back, you might not need that much of a log file because it won't write that exhaustively, right? So let's say at S5 it starts rolling back. So the rolling back, let's say, completed in a log secondary is assigned and completed here. So the moment what happens is all these active log files will be changed to eligible status. This information is still there. The log information is still there on S1, S2, S3, S4, S5 and S6. So these move from active to eligible for archiving. So this might be S6 can be still, S5 can be still active, S6 can be, sorry, S6 still active. Now at this point, the moment these are eligible for archive, yes, the background process will immediately move these S1 to S5 to this archive log location. So we don't, DB2 doesn't throw away these log files. S5. Now what happens here is, since these 5 moved here, you have now the latest sequence S6, and the remaining you get S8 like this allocated back here. These might be empty. Okay, only S6 is my S6 is only my current active one, so remaining can be empty right now. Vasu, you are there, or did you drop? I think he just dropped off. He might be coming back. So that's the story when we roll back. Now,
so I have a quick question, Ravi, here.
yes.
So let's say we have 5 logs here, transaction logs, let's say. We have 5 transaction logs. And there are 2 transactions happening in the system. We talked about one transaction, right?
Right.
So we have 2 transactions working. One transaction is using, they both use the same transaction logs, right? One transaction committed after in S5, but second transaction is not yet committed. So, what happens during the time? Like, it only archives those committed transactions, or the second one is still waiting, right? It is still writing.
Yes, that's a good question. So it's nothing. The archiving is the what you call scope of archiving is always at a archive log, entire log, not archive log, entire transaction log. So when I say this is active, there might be 100 transactions as part of S1, but 99 already committed, but one is still active. You still don't push this to archive log for that 99 transactions. They still sit here. Right. It's the movement is only at I see you also. You just joined 1 second. You still move only these log file. Right. So that is why sometimes what happens is when we just say export or import millions of records table, our redo or our transaction log gets generated hugely, right? So one of the important things to consider while designing DB2 system is giving enough disk space for transactional logs, because you can get really messy, because this chain just keeps on growing, right? So
because
it's not circular. Why it's not circular? Because I have to compromise this undo case, right? Undo. I don't have an undo table space. I have to do the both in a transaction logs only. All right. Okay. Yes, Vasu. Go ahead. Did I?
Sorry, my connected, so I just joined back. The question what I was asking was, so let's say if the active log is on one mount point and archive is on a different mount point. Let's say the primary log is full. That means my disk at that time it's supposed to do a rollback because it is full. There is no other space left. Even the secondary is also full, right? So in area when it is full, what options that I have? Does it can manage on its own and it can do a rollback, or because as you said, it does require additional logs to do a rollback. That means it cannot even do a rollback at that given situation, right?
I have 2 scenarios here. One is the disk is full. When I say disk, the drive, the mount point is full. So consider 2 scenarios here. Let's say scenario 1. In scenario 1, let's say I'm storing it on some mount DB2 archive logs. This is my mount. It's not archive logs, the transaction logs. This mount point. So my primary is set as 250 and second is 6. Right? What happened is by some bad design or whatever, after allocating, see, the first thing you do is the first thing that happens is when you start DB2, right, all these logs are pre-allocated for you first. All these 250 logs are pre-allocated. So if each log is like 300 MB or let's say even some XMB, all this is pre-allocated. So that means the space is already there. So there is no question of you running out of a disk for primary. If you run out of disk for primary at runtime, there is no such concept. Because before you even initialize, you change it from no archive log to archive log mode, this space is allocated, so you would know even at that time. The archive log mode conversion itself fails if you don't have enough space. Let's say 250 of 500 MB, right? 125 GB. If you don't have 125 GB in this, the archive log conversion itself fails. Right? But you cannot plan for this second, right? Let's say I put a second as -1, right? At a runtime, it started allocating log 1, log 2, log 250. Then since there is an open transaction, a long transaction, it start allocating 252, right? Right? But what happens here is, let's say if you reach, there are two scenarios you can reach. Since I have a log second as infinite, I will never run out of logs. I'll just keep allocating and allocating and allocating. But what if I reach limit set at a OS level? So this is a scenario number 1. If I reach limit at OS, right? It's not the scenario of transaction log full. It's the scenario of system yes, you still get the transaction log full. It's not exactly the transaction log full. I can get you the exact number, something like no more space left to allocate transaction log, something like that. It's not a transaction logs full. This is not a limit we are reaching from database side. We are reaching the limit from OS side. So it cannot allocate no more space to allocate for transaction log, whatever that is. Right. Right. But the point is log second, right? It will at least try to allocate one log ahead. Right. So it has, for redo, like I said, for rolling back, it does not need the logs that it needed for actual transaction, right? So all I need is just one log is enough for me to roll back how bigger the transaction can be, because it's not writing anything. It's just saying that I'm rolling back this transaction, right? Yes. To answer your question at scenario number 1, whether it is a OS level hard limit or scenario number 2, it's a DB level hard limit. Here definitely you see this transaction logs full message like we have seen yesterday. Right. So both cases you'll just roll back. Something missing. I'm missing in your question to answer. Is this what you are looking, Vasu, or did I miss something?
Yeah, I understand. It might not. What I was thinking is, if it is totally full, if you literally have a 0 byte on the disk, then in that scenario, can it be able to recover? Worst case, we don't want to restart the system when it is in that situation rollback, because it's going to be even worse. So that's why I was trying to understand it. I understand. So basically, it will not go to the point where it doesn't even have the space for rollback. Maybe it will be thinking ahead like an oracle. Maybe redo log space. It will try to think if I need 10 meg active log, then it will think at 5 meg should be ready for the redo undo. Means like for the rollback, it might be thinking and say reaching that point.
Yes.
Early warning. It makes
thinks one log file ahead, right? So.
Okay, got it. Just adding to the previous question to Chandra's question. So why the export is creating so much log? Because export is basically just a reading, right? Why the read will generate such a huge log? I understand load or anything that you're doing import, you're creating a log because you're making a change to the data. Because you are just reading, right? Export is basically you're just reading the log and writing
No, that's not exactly what I mean. What I meant was when you do export and import operation, the other side of it does it. Export will never create any export is not a DML, right? So it won't generate the log file. No, we were discussing just
that's
that.
What, maybe I.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we are doing any huge table movement, that's when you come across these log files full as well on the other side.
Okay.
Side. So to come back to the previous question, when I can see the system stuck is when my archive log directory is full, right? I have no issues here, but I'm healthy here. But for some reason, my archive log location is saying that it's 1 terabyte. But if I don't have enough space to write it here in the archive logs, that's when your database will go to stuck state. This is one of the common issues we see. So what we learned is we move these S1 to archive log location, S2 to archive log location, S3. Database is functioning very healthy, but we haven't done a cleaning on this archive log, so there is no enough space to write in this file system, right? So it is trying to push, let's say, log S6, but there is no enough space, right? It won't fail immediately because it might have S7 and S8 to take care of it, right? But the moment it is even the primary is consumed and even the secondary is consumed, right? When you cannot write anything into the archive log directory, that's when it just throws an it just hangs, nothing else. It just hangs. So how can I avoid this situation? This monitoring has to happen from OS level, right? So whenever we have like 80% of this full, you get alert. So generally the alerts are like better to be little.
Does the clean the archive log? When we does it clean the archive log? Because we can be keeping the log forever, right? So at one point of time we had to make sure that logs are being moved out of the system, correct?
Right. It's something that we do it manually, right? So we know our backup. It pretty much depends on the backup strategy. So how long you want to keep your log files. So a job runs pretty much at a OS level. Just clean up the logs which are older than 3 days or 4 days because I have an incremental every day, full at the weekend. So something we clean this from the OS side.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, so
Ravi, when we are backing up, what are we backing up? When we back up the logs, are we backing up the archive logs?
Archive logs and current log file, yes.
But the archive logs are not, this is something we need to delete manually or
hold on a second. So
you're speaking ahead.
Yeah, hold on a second. So when I say I am backing up my log files, you are just backing up the archive logs, nothing else. It's a physical copy using a cp command, right? When I actually take database backup, the logs are also included in it. That is only these transactional logs. I have a physical copy of all the data files, right? Plus I just back up the transactional logs here, because I have my all the open transactions, if any, here. So when I take a database backup, it just the backup of these data files plus these transactional logs. That's it. These two are enough for me to have a stable copy. We'll see that, we're just going there. So continuing from where we left off yesterday, how do I convert my database from no archive log to archive log mode? There is a DB level configuration parameter, log arc method 1 and method 2. That means I can put my transactional log file in two different archive directories or file systems for safer side. Sometimes you do one at a disk and one in a TSM. So when we change this important parameter, you have to deactivate and activate the database. So sometimes people ask, how do I bounce a database? We know how to bounce an instance using DB2 stop and DB2 start. How do I bounce a database? There is no concept of bouncing of a database here. It's only deactivate and activate. Deactivate will take out all the memory allocated. Then it will reallocate the memory. The moment you do this kind of a change, and when you are trying to connect to the database, it says that backup pending. Right? Let me show you this here. I think we should have this for one of the databases. When I say DB2 list DB directory, DB2 connect to test DB1, DB2 get DB config. When I connect it to a specific database, I run the DB2 get DB config, I get the information. Or you can use for giving the database name. What I want to get out of here is, what is this log arc method 1? For test DB1 database, log arc method 1 is off and even method 2 is off. It's two different directories. That's it. So since these two are off, I don't have archive logging enabled. So how do I check if database has archive logging enabled or not? From these parameters. So let me enable archive logging for this. Make dir just some random directory I'm giving. So I simply do the update statement, update So updating any configuration parameter is, whether it is a DB or instance level DBM, update DB config for database name using the parameter. Here, what other values it can take? It can take a storage manager directly, like TSM. There are some TSM level configuration parameters here. So we just update this TSM related information. Then you just mention TSM, it will directly go and sit in TSM. Right, so I updated only one here, the log arc method 1. So it's up to you if you want to store the same log file in other directory as well. So let's do that. So the information you see here is one or more parameters submitted for immediate modification and they cannot be changed dynamically. For these configuration parameters, the database must be shut down and reactivated. So how do I do that? Deactivate database test DB1. So what it gave me is it gave me an error saying that the application is already connected to an active database. So I just say that if I say DB2 connect, it shows me that if I am connected to any database. So let's first terminate this connection. So one point you need to remember is before you terminate any connection, before you deactivate any database, make sure there are no open sessions to the database. Session is nothing but an application here. Make sure we don't have any sessions for it, right? You say that DB2, if there is any session, you simply say that force application and the session ID. Okay, right? Then you can try to deactivate. Otherwise, it won't allow to deactivate. What? I think it takes some time to get this refreshed because it's an asynchronous operation. Force is an asynchronous operation. So if still not happening, just say that terminate. It terminates the current connection. Then try to do a deactivate. It means it releases all the memory assigned. Then when you activate, the parameters that you have updated will take into effect. But you see the error it is giving. When you are trying to activate it, it is saying that activation failed because it's in a backup pending state. There is something at a DB level, a parameter called pending. If you search for a word called pending, at a configuration level, it says that whether it is pending, backup pending, or roll forward pending, or a restore pending, right? So if database is not in a connected state, you cannot not in a connectable state, you can quickly check from here that what's wrong. So it is waiting on a backup. So taking a backup is very easy. We'll talk about this in detail. Backup database test DB1 to some directory. So the result of a backup statement here is a single file. The result of a backup statement is a single file. And if you go back and check the pending state now, nothing is pending. Now if you are trying to activate database, you should be able to activate it.
But Ravi, what is the reason to back up now?
Yes, you have changed a very important configuration parameter, such as moving from no archive to archive. So what database says is when you are moving from no archive to archive, I need a starting point. Because when I say archives are getting generated, they are generated on top of a backup. So we have to go and take the backup. Right. So those are the steps I have detailed here. This is a very important L1 task. Right. DB2 has a utility called DB2 CK log, check log. Sometimes during the restore or some kind of an operation, it is important for us to check integrity of the log we have. Is it log in a restorable position or not? So you can quickly check the log status using DB2 CK log from log number 3 to log number 5. It will check those 3 logs, S3, S4 and S5. If they are in a good condition, not corrupted, it gives you a written code 0. Right. Just one more tool that helps you to check stuff. So some of the key logging configuration parameters, few of them we have already discussed. This is log primary, log second, log buffer size, the buffer size, the redo buffer in memory, the log file size, what is the primary log file size and secondary log file size, right? This log path and new log path is the default location where your transaction logs are going. So this is the one, new log path. So this fail arc path is
what is the difference, Ravi? Log path and new log path?
It initially says it's a new log path. We just refer it as a new log path. That's it. Log path you can just ignore. I think this is something from the older ones. It's no more there.
Okay.
When I hold on a second. No. So path to log files is a default location. Okay. But if you look at this default location, this is by default storing it in my home directory. Why it is storing it in my home directory? If I go back to my testdb1's initial create database command, I give db path as my home directory. But it is never advisable to store log files in your db path or your home directory. We generally keep these transactional logs in a separate file system, right? So if you want to update this, you update using new log path.
I got it.
Okay, so by default, yeah, this is a little confusing. So there is nothing called log path here. You can see anywhere, just a log path. Log path is nothing but path to log files. This is the default one. By default, you have no option other than when you create a database, it by default keeps the log path within your DB path. But as a best practice, we'll move these out of this location and put it in a separate file system of its own. Because when I give a log primary as, let's say, 200 and each log file size as 500 MB, it itself is like 1 terabyte, right? Or at least 100 GB, sorry, right? 100 GB you cannot put it in a home directory. So if you want to change that, we use this new log path. Yeah, actually we use this as part of one of the restore exercises. Okay. Yes.
Got it.
Now we also have something called log arc method 1 and method 2. We were talking about a scenario where this is full. Log arc method 1 is full and method 2 is full. Both directories are full and your system goes to hang state. The instance goes to hang state. Sorry, the database goes to hang state. It might not affect the whole instance because this is only database level parameters. In that scenario, we have something called fail arc path. Right? This method 2 and method 1's backup this is. We let's say give it as, let's say, some 50 gig. If these two are full for some reason, it will start writing it into this fail arc path. It is archive to the archive, maybe backup to the archive. So failover log archive path, specify the third target to archive logs if primary and secondary archive paths are fail. Because this is a scenario where you get a downtime. If any one of or both of these are full, I mean, if any one of it is full, it still functions. But if both are full, then it cannot move forward. Right? It's not a rollback scenario because it's sectional to the database. But X database cannot write it here, so it stucks the database.
One quick question. When you say primary and secondary, are we talking about duplicate copy, or are we talking about additional disk location?
Duplicate copy. This method 1 and method 2 are duplicate copy. We give them a separate disk, separate file systems. Right. Yep, this will be also in a separate file system or whatever that is. It just needs some extra space. Generally, very less environments use it, because if you manage these file system well, and if you have a very good monitoring team, at least a reasonable monitoring team, there will be alert comes at like 60%, 70%, right? So you might not need this fail arc path at all. So we looked at log second and log primary, the little equation, and some control parameters, number of log spans and max log. We spoke in that already, right? There is a little equation, how much is the log space I can have, right? The log I can give up to somewhere like 4 terabyte or so. I can have the log file size. It's a huge size. Okay. Now I'm skipping this calculation here, but one important thing is, Yusha asked me a question that how do I take backup of these log files, right? When I say backup of the log files, it's only backup of archive log location. So at that point, it is important to switch the log file at transactional level. So how do I switch the log file, right? In Oracle, you say that alter system or alter database switch log file, right? Here, DB2 archive log for database and database name. It will switch the log file pointer. This is a command. Archive log for database and database name. Then you start the log copy. So this also answers your question, Vasu, from yesterday. In a bank scenario where you have to take every 5 minutes a backup, the log backup. So this helps us. So this is something called log control files, right? The location of them is DB path. Now let me go to the DB path of any database and show you. So let's go to the DB path of utils. You have something called DB2 INSC2. DB path is SQL DBDIR. No, that's not a DBDIR. It's a SQL. It's a DBDIR. So this DB path has something called log control file. Same copy, two different, same data, two different copies. So what is this log control file, which has a GLFH? Sometimes you see LFH. When a database restarts after failure, for example, I did DB2 stop force, or someone pulled out the power cable. Instance applies transaction information stored in log files to return database to a consistent state. This is called a crash recovery, right? To determine which records from log files need to be applied to the database, the instance uses information recorded in the log control files. So we don't have a DPF at this point, so we are not seeing just LFH. Otherwise, it's a global log control file. Two copies. If one damaged, the other one can still used. So that means when I do a DB2 stop force, that's it's like pulling out the cable and putting it again. When I'm trying to do a restart, the first thing it checks is this log control file. It's something like control file in Oracle. What is my checkpoint? What is the latest SCN I should roll back to? Things like that. This is the file it checks, saying that where is my consistent transaction ID. So this is the file it actually refers. Now it is going for a crash recovery, right? Yeah, I know why this error, because of TCP/IP. Okay, you see, this is a very important, and we have to do nothing. We just have to know this. Okay, and there is an important parameter at a database level called page as target MCR, right? It used to be something called Softmax. Now let me talk about this parameter first, right? This configuration parameter specifies the target duration in seconds for changed pages to be kept in local buffer pool before they are persisted to the tablespace storage. Very important. How frequent my checkpoint should happen is decided by this guy. You know what is a checkpoint, right? When a checkpoint happens, one of the important things that happens is, going back to our example of update statement. I updated here, right? I wrote the information in these transaction logs, but the modified copy is still here, right? Modified block is still here, or page is still here. Now when this modified block will go and sit in disk, so that I don't need these anymore, the logs anymore. How frequent? It's not only me, right? Like Chandra mentioned, this is a multi-user environment. If multiple users also on the system, they modify the blocks. How frequently these modified blocks will be flushed from memory to disk? This is actually the important criteria during a recovery. So if I have a, so what we are trying to say here is how, a little tricky one to understand, right? How frequent I move from here to here is actually dependent on what is your there are some terms at a leadership level. They talk about these RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Recovery point objective should always be to the latest commit, right? If a crash happens, recovery time objective is how faster you can restore your or recover your database, right? So this is the parameter controls this. When I say 240, I want my crash recovery to happen in 4 minutes maximum, right? For 4 minutes to follow, for system to follow 4 minutes, how many bad buffers it can keep it here, how many dirty buffers it can keep it in memory. Let's say I have a 240, right? So it might be putting like 10,000 dirty buffers in memory, right? So the moment 10,001 comes up, it flushes because it cannot uh, do a crash recovery. When I say crash recovery, recovering these 10,000 dirty buffers from transactional logs. But if I just put this to 120, maybe the flush from memory to disk happens after every 5,000 dirty buffers. Because to recover these 5,000 modified blocks or pages, you need 2 minutes. You see what I'm trying to say? So the bottom line for this page as target MCR is just a target. So when someone asks me, what is your RTO, recovery time objective, if a crash happens? I mean, the worst case scenario is different. When my data file is gone, we have to go from physical restores. But on a normal scenario, if I pull a plug out and put a plug back in and database restarts, what is my RTO? How faster your database can come back? So this is this parameter. You cannot keep this. That's why the trade-off between performance and crash recovery. See, I cannot keep flushing data from memory to disk because it's very performance intensive operation. So that's why you have to have a trade-off. What is best in your environment? Some follow. We have a 240. We are okay for the 4 minutes of recovery, right? But if you go to the aggressive banks, they might not. 4 hours is a very big for them, right? Stock markets, 4 minutes is a very big for them. They might have like maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds. So in that scenario, it aggressively does a checkpoint from memory to disk after every 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Sounds good, this parameter?
Yep.
Yeah, it should. Okay. It's configurable online. That this is the parameter. This is used when the softmax parameter is configured to a value of 0. Yeah, there used to be in an older version something called softmax, right? So this was a little confusing. In the older versions, softmax is 520 means 5.2 log files. When I say it's deprecated from 10.5 onwards, replaced with this pages target MCR. When I say 520 means by 100 is 5.2. In a crash, the maximum logs you expect database to do is only 5.2. For that to happen, how much of dirty data it should keep in memory? It's a reverse engineering. So it's too confusing. So that's why they changed it to 240. So actually, this is where the page cleaners also come into picture. How faster you should clean your dirty pages. It affects the performance. The smaller number affects the performance. Like I said, it's a trade-off always between performance versus your crash recovery time. Okay. Now just take a minute to read this. I'll just be back in 15-20 seconds. These are the three different scenarios of a database page. Right. At the time of a database failure from an event such as a power failure, there might have been changes to database which common scenarios, right? When I just pull out the plug, I can have a scenario where I have some data which is not committed, but it is updated in the buffer pool. I have committed, but it's not yet been written to buffer pool to disk because this is within these 240 seconds of target MCR. I have been committed and written to buffer pool to disk, so this is a safe situation. So to handle this situation of 1 and 2 is where we need the transactional logs.
Exactly.
Right. When a database is restarted, the log control file, the one we spoke a few slides back, global log control file will be used to perform crash recovery of a database, which ensures that a database is left in a consistent state. So we don't have to do anything, it's taken care because in 1-2 situation, it tries to apply the transaction logs. As long as we have those logs there, system does the crash recovery. So all committed transactions are applied and uncommitted are rolled back. This is the same situation. To determine which records from the log file needs to be applied to the database manager uses information recorded in a log control file. So this is where it uses this log control file. So any questions on this? It should be straightforward. It just not specific to DB2. Any database does the same thing. Maybe the terminology different. Now let's get back to the database backup. This is actually the easiest part, right? We have done the toughest part so far. When I say database backup, it can be a copy of a database or you can do a copy of a tablespace. These are the two entities you can backup. So it includes the user data, catalog data, all control files such as your buffer pool information. We haven't spoken buffer pools yet. Tablespace information, database configurations, the log controls, all that information will be copied as part of this backup or a tablespace backup. There are two different backup modes like any other database. One is offline backup, another one is online backup. The word offline means that you have a database in a down situation. Your database is deactivated, no applications connected, which is the default one and which is the only option available when you have a circular logging enabled. Circular logging, right? It's a no archive log mode. In a no archive log mode, you cannot do online backup. It's a standard. Online backup, it allows the multiple users. That means my database is available even during the backup. And of course, I can do either offline or online to disk or a tape or a TSM or any storage vendor. What is the command for me to take the backups? If you look at the whole DB2 commands are like English language commands. Backup also no different. You start with DB2, backup database. Yes, I want to backup a database. Then what database? You want to backup in online or offline mode. Default is offline. So if I am doing an online backup, I have to give online word here. Right, where to store the backup? The destination. That's it, simple. If it is online, you say that backup database name online to a specific directory. If it is offline, you don't give this online word. There is a tool called Data Studio which we install as part of our course as well, which is a kind of an administrative tool from GUI tool or development tool. It's a mix of everything. So you can also do a backup of a database from front end, but we don't do that. It's pretty much only backups happening through scripts from server. The output of the backup statement is a single file. If I am taking a backup of a sample database, the output of any backup statement is a single file. So this is how the file name will be. Database name. The second parameter specifies type of backup. 0 for full backup. 3 for tablespace backup. You remember in load example we used an option called copy S. When I say copy S, I give where to copy that load file. Right? I hope I still have it here. If I go to temp here, you see something called 4 here. So this means utils is the database. 4 says it's a copy S. It's the outcome of a copy S. Here 0 is a full backup. Then instance name, DB2 INST2. Partition name. If you have a DPF feature, you have a partition 1, 2 like that. The timestamp 2008, 18, sorry, 423, the time. And this 001 specifies the sequence. What do I mean by sequence is, even though I say you get only one file here, sometimes you get two, sometimes you get three like this. When you get 1, 2, 3 like this, when you are taking backup in parallel, when you want to take backup in parallel, you can give parallel threads. So you can give them in a 3 different files will be written same time. That means one extent is written here, another extent is written here, and third extent is written here parallelly, just to improve the parallel speed, backup speed. But for now, a blind rule assume that the outcome of a backup statement is a single file. The file format is database name, type of a backup, instance name, partition name, time, and the sequence. That is why previously I have done a simple temp backup, right? Backup to temp, right? Test DB1. When I was enabling the archive log, this is the backup. Test DB1 database, 0 means full backup, DB2 INST2 instance, partition, timestamp, the sequence. How do I do a table space backup, right? So you can also do table space backup. It enables users to back up a subset of database. Multiple table spaces can be specified. Database must be using archive logging, right? Table space backup can run in both online and offline backup mode. You just specify the extra keyword saying the table space in bracket. What is the table space you have to backup, right? This is online.
Tablespace itself is a virtual thing, right? So how is it developed? How can you perform offline backup?
When there are no connections, pretty much. If you want a consistent thing, yeah. That means no activity is happening on the objects within the table space. When I say objects,
you don't mean when database is down. Okay.
Yeah, it's not database down, just a table space.
Okay, gotcha. And Ravi, so there are multiple types of backup in this one. Like for example, let's say my database consists of multiple table spaces. So can I do only one table space backup in that scenario?
Yes. Yeah, but to do a table space backup at some point in the backend, you have to have a full backup, right? Make sure you have a full backup, even like a year back you have taken. Right.
Okay. To support the consistency.
Okay. Yeah. Just give me one quick second. Just. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So that answers your question, right?
Yeah, yes, Ravi. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. So we can also do incremental backups. As the name incremental says, there are two different options. I can do a full backup over weekends, and in middle, I can simply depend upon transactional logs, right? But you can also go for cumulative backups, which just increases with each passing day. You can also go for delta, right? Delta is nothing but just incremental delta. But these are for these backups to come into picture, incremental or incremental delta, right? You have to enable a track mode parameter. The track mode parameter specifies we have to track each and every page modification that's happening from the previous backup, full backup. So this is a DB level parameter. So how do I enable the track mode? Very easy. The same like any other parameter. We can also do a compression of a database backups, right? One common feedback I get from students, especially folks coming from Oracle side, is the backup and recovery is very straightforward in DB2. I mean, Oracle is better in few areas, especially like documentation, monitoring, and that stuff. But DB2 is the master in the backup and recovery. It's very straightforward, very easy, not to mess up many things, right? It takes care of it, right? So those kind of, you will see it through the examples, how simple it is. So you can compress. Compression is always a trade-off between space and CPU. We can also optimize the backup performance by giving various parallel threads, right? I can give multiple target directories, right? But these are all taken care by default. Even if we don't give, DB2 has something called automatic tuning, right? It calculates how many parallel threads and it does all this stuff. What is the buffers? There is something called util heap size, which we'll talk about in memory management. This is like a big buffer. Backup and recovery goes through this buffer size. So, you don't really have to give them. System takes care of it automatically. Back those like version 8, version 7, maybe version 9, we have to play around this, but from version 10.1, it's pretty much taken care. Like you have a DB2 CK log, DB2 check log. You have something called DB2 check backup. It just checks the backup's integrity. If someone give you a backup image and asks you to, okay, can you restore this? You can get the header information from the backup using -h option. The header information quickly tells you like what kind of a backup it is. Is it online backup or offline backup? When it is online backup, is the transaction logs included as part of this backup? Right? So when it is taken, the database name and all that information, you can see it here.
One quick thing, Ravi. So is it a common thing to check the backups if it goes to the TSM? TSM is not an attached storage to a specific server. Basically, it is outside. So you are going through a network, obviously. So there is some risk. But even you can specify when you are doing this check, DB2 check backup, can you give directly the TSM path? How do we give if we need to do that one?
Yeah, we can give that TSM path, yes, but I don't have the command handy, but I can point you there. Let me check the references today. We actually back up to TSM only. I should be able to pull that information for you.
Okay. Is it common? Because quite a few places I don't see them verifying it. I know this is very important, but with your experience, what do you see for especially for the DB2?
I haven't done that lately, to be honest with you. Probably what we do is I remember we set that up probably like 4.5, 5 years back, the TSM, when we moved, not 4.5, it's almost 6.5, 7 years, when we moved from mainframe to LUW. That was the initial time only, we just tested it out once, right? After that, a number of times we took the production copy and production copy from TSM and restored it on a development environment. So it all went fine. So we never worried about checking the backup integrity. So it's a taken care, right? So it's not really needed. unless you want to be extra cautious. But I'll get you that information, like where it is storing in a TSM the backup pieces. Right. There are tools that talk to TSM and gets you that information. There is a command here in DB2 itself. Generally, what we do is this is what we do. What do we do? Yes. Let's say we have this production. Let's say DB2 prod. It goes to TSM. Right, we have a DB2 dev 1. Right, let's say I have a backup taken on 20th April. Now from DB2 dev 1, we'll work with the TSM admin guy and tell that guy that, okay, can you put the level 0 backup that ran on 20th April on one of the file system on DB2 dev 1 here. So this guy put somewhere on here the image, the single file, he'll put it here. The extraction from the tape TSM might take some time, but yeah, so this is one way we do a restore on a development QA environments. Otherwise, we have to configure the communication between this guy and this guy. Just in case if production crashes, I don't really need the TSM admin guy to put this backup on the local file system. I can directly communicate because the communication is already established here. In development scenario, there is no such communication. Generally, we don't connect dev with the production TSM because it's too risky, right? So we'll just ask a TSM admin to, okay, can you copy this backup, because this is all dev can wait, right? But in case of a production, if a crash happens and if I have to restore it from backups, it's just simple command, right? Okay, restore from TSM. The TSM library takes care of it, getting the latest backup. Or I can give a point in time recovery. I'll guide you to the document.
Okay, thank you.
So one good thing it has is it includes the log files. This is an important point to note. When I take a backup, right? When I include logs used to be an explicit option, but it is now part of the backup. When I say include logs, it includes all the active transactional logs that are needed for. So when I say include logs here, it takes this backup of all the data files and also the log files. Current active log files will be part of the backup. It takes all the data files backup at last 5 or 10 minutes or before it is closing down the backup. It simply copies all these files even in the single file image you are getting, right?
So when you restore, it also restores into archives.
Exactly.
Log files.
That's the point. Yes, that's why it is very simple, very easy, right?
You mean archives, right? Not active transaction logs.
You don't need archives. Why do you need archives?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Now I have a tricky question for you. So you have, let's say, you have multiple.
Hold on. Before I say that, let me finish up this. So that's not exactly right when I say that why do you need archives. So let me give you some time frame. So if time is 8:22 here, I have started a full backup now. Sorry, I have taken a full backup here. Now what it does is it does the physical copy plus current active transactional logs, right? And just generates a file something like dbname.geo.blah blah blah. So when someone asks me to restore, so let's say tomorrow someone came back and said that, okay, when we have a full backup, can you restore it, right? So I'll just copy this image to dev environment and I just start restore, and with the restore it restores the physical copy plus transactional logs. the transaction logs which are included in this physical copy. Right? Now go ahead and ask your question.
Now I have one silly question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are these transaction logs are at database level or
these are database level? Yes, that's a very good question. It's not a simple one. A very good question. Yeah.
So yeah, that answers my question. My what I thought of asking you, I have two different databases, and if I am restoring backup for one database, then it flushes the existing transactions and restores from the backup, right? So I was about to ask you.
No, it's at a DB level.
This is you said it is DB level, then that addresses my question.
Right. There are some databases who does it at a instance level. For example, IBM Informix does it at a instance level. I think even Oracle, when you talk about a multi-tenant, I think it even does at a all databases level. You can have multiple databases in policy, right? So. Okay, so let's move on. So let me wrap it up this today, and we'll do the labs in the next session. Now, yeah, once I have the database backup, so restore, the first thing that I need for restore is a recovery history file. Now the DB2 recovery related system files, the first one is a recovery history file. This guy is created during a create database command, and this is included in each and every DB2 backup. So this recovery history again, which is part of a DB2 DB path directory. Whenever I do a backup of a database, information is written here. Whenever I do a restore, information is written here. This is just for system, just to keep track of some important operations which affects the system's consistency. Sorry, integrity. I can see the history of DB2 backups. I can simply say DB2 list history. We can explore this command during our lab time. You can see the history of the backups taken and history of the roll forward. If you do any rearc, all that information, you can get it. I can also get the backups taken since a specific timestamp. Backups that includes a specific table or object, right? List history is a command that gives me that information. Like I said, in other databases, you might do a database query to get this information, right? SQL query. Here you don't have to do it. It's all happens through commands. Have you seen me writing any big SQL so far other than insert and select, right? We are like almost halfway through the course. No, you don't really need that stuff in DB2. But what happens internally is it converts this into a SQL and gets you the data. It's a different story though. But at a high level, it's a purely admin, right? And another important file that includes as part of database backup is a log control, which is a crash recovery, which we already looked at it. These two are the important recovery files. This is for database recovery. This is for even the crash recovery. Now the database recovery. There are three types of recoveries in any database. One is crash or restart recovery. When I pull the plug out and put it back, the crash recovery, which is automatic. Version recovery, or in other shots, recovering till the previous full backup. That's it. There is no concept of applying logs here. And the third and most important one is a point in time recovery, which is called the roll forward recovery, right? Crash recovery and version recovery are enabled by default. You don't have a roll forward recovery enabled because you don't have an archive log mode enabled by default. So that's what this statement meaning. I'll skim through this very fast, but we'll come across these exercises. So again, the restore utility is very simple. Restore database name from a specific directory. If you look at whenever you take a backup, each backup has a timestamp. So restore database name from specific directory taken at the timestamp you specify. Tablespace restore is also the same thing, right? No different. So we have an example on that too. Also the incremental restore, I have an example given there. So that's pretty much this restore database name incremental. Automatic means it picks up all the level 1s, level 2s. So this roll forward command, don't worry on this. I'll walk you through an example. So once you restore, once you do a physical copy, you have to apply the logs, right? So in Oracle, we have something like until cancel or until a specific time or until SCN, the similar options here. This is a little confusing thing, right? Redirected restore is a concept where you take a backup on a production and you try to restore it on development, right? Where the directory structures between production and development are different. You see, on a production you might have a U01 file system. A non-production you might not have a U01, you have a U02. How do you cope up with that? But this is of less significance, especially from 10.1, because you have something here called automatic storage. So but this is very helpful when I am trying to restore even on the same database where one of my file system is gone. You see, for some reason a storage team came to you and said that out of these 5 storage groups, one storage is gone bad. For this we are giving alternative storage. Yeah, but redirected restore used to be very useful thing previously when you want to restore production to non-production where you have a different file structures. But that scenario is gone now. But I'll walk you through this example too, like how do you change the structure of Tablespace, the data file storages. You can modify them during a restore time. If a specific Tablespace is going in U01, you can put the Tablespace in U02 file system, right? Redirected, the redirection of data to some other location, right? What we will see as part of exercises is one thing we have already looked at. Let me open this. So this is the exercises talk. So we try to reproduce that log full scenario because that's one of the scenarios we come across. So here somewhere you see the transaction log full, right? We'll reproduce this scenario in the next session, right? And the solution for it. And we have already completed archive logging. How do I enable it? The third scenario is how do I take offline backup and do a offline restore. So it is advisable if we have a multiple instances running. So we take backup on one instance and we do a restore on other instance, other DB2 instance. So the fourth one, it's online backup and restore. So this is the include logs I was talking about. We do, again, we take a backup on one instance, we do a restore on other instance. So these 4 exercises I will do in our next class. Now that brings me to a question that when is our next class? So ideally I should be having a 4 this week, but we had only 3. I'm available tomorrow same time if all of you are available. Otherwise we'll meet on a regular time next week.